What has been your involvement with Safe System assessments? Nothing. Safe System what now? I've heard the term, don't know much more. I've had one done on one of my projects. I've done one. I live, breathe, and eat Safe System assessments. Of course, we don't know who's answering what, so we'll give it a second to see how we go there. Okay, lots of good responses coming in. I think we can end that now, and we can have a look at the results. And most people sort of heard the term, don't know much more. Quite a few have had them done on their projects, so that's good. We're starting to see more and more of that happening. A couple of people have got in there and rolled up the sleeves and done them. Somebody lives and breathes and eats Safe System assessments. That's quite exciting. Okay, that's good. That gives me a bit of a gauge for where we're at with these. So I'll stop sharing that. The process for undertaking Safe System assessments was detailed by Austroads in late 2016. So it's been around for a few years. It's getting more and more traction now. And this is the document. And it lays out how to undertake this Safe System assessment. Now, since its release, there's been a bit of learnings about practically what works, what doesn't work in these assessments. And we've refined that there's been some supplementary guidance provided by some of the jurisdictions. So I was part of the working group for this document. I wasn't the author of it, but I was in there contributing some ideas and some thoughts throughout the process. But when this came out, it was very much something that hadn't been done. So there were some people, I was one of them, out and about trying to look at projects and suggest ways to make them better aligned with Safe System principles, and doing it in different forms, just reports or the like. And yeah, industry was really craving something that was a bit more of a process that lots of people could follow. And this came out. So since its release, 2 jurisdictions have put out supplementary guidelines, so that's Victoria and South Australia, to try to clarify some of the things that Austroads was very unclear about, to actually say, Austroads said this, but we actually, in practice, are going to do this because, as I said, Austroads there hadn't been many Safe System assessments or any Safe System assessments done when that document was released. So some of these jurisdictions found out when they were doing them that they needed something to be altered a little bit. So there's some slight variations within these documents. The process I'll be talking you through sort of aligns with these documents and Austroads, and I'll point out where there's just 1 or 2 little things that you need to keep in mind if you're just solely following the Austroads document. Like always, pop your questions into the chat as we go, but I'm going to start at the end. And this is one of the outputs of a Safe System assessment. So you can see here, we've got a graph, and it's got these clusters here, and they are crash types: run off the road, head on, intersection, other, pedestrian, cyclists, and motorcyclists. So they're the crash types. I'll come back to those and I'll describe them more. On the y-axis here, we've got Safe System alignment score. This is how well it aligns with safe system principles. It's a risk score to a degree. And the lower the risk score, the better. The red bars here represent the existing road environment. And then you'll see there that the orange represents some roundabout solution that they've got, or some design of a roundabout. The blue represents the modified T intersection with traffic signals, and the grey represents the conventional T intersection with traffic signals. And so you can start to see where the risk presents itself in these different scenarios. Okay, so what I want to do now is take you through how do you create one of these for your intersection or your length of road or whatever it is. Well, the first thing you do, and Austroads has set these questions, but you can add other questions to it if you want, is you gather a really good understanding of the context of the project or the existing road environment. So what's the reason for the project? If they're doing what's the reason for this project? Why are they doing it? What's the function of the road? What's the speed environment? What road users are present? What's the vehicle composition? And you get lots and lots of information in about this from the project team to really help you get your head around this whole thing. So often I will, with a safe system assessment team, we will send these questions through to whoever's asked for the assessment to be done and say, can you provide us any background documents, any information you've got for this, and then maybe have a catch up with them and just ask some questions and gather that intel. So that's going to help you do your assessment, but it's also going to help you make recommendations for alterations that are more likely to be taken on because they understand the context of the project and the road function and those sorts of things. But the meat of the safe system assessment is this safe system assessment matrix. And we're going to spend a good bit of time on this page, or bouncing between the next page and this page. So the matrix, or the table we've got in front of us here, has 3 rows. And they are exposure and likelihood and severity. So that's why we've been constantly working on that throughout these last modules. What is the exposure to the crash? What is the likelihood of the crash? And how bad is the crash going to be when it happens? And the columns are those crashes that you saw, those crash types that you saw. So we have run-off road, head-on, and intersection crashes. And they are for vehicles, okay? Cars, trucks. It's dominated by cars usually, but cars and trucks for those crashes, crash types. Then we have pedestrians, which is crashes where vehicles hit pedestrians, or cyclists might hit a pedestrian, or motorcyclists might hit a pedestrian, but pedestrians, cyclists, and motorcyclists. Now, with those crash types, it's crashes where the pedestrian is the one that's injured, for example. So if a pedestrian was crossing the road at an intersection and was struck by a vehicle, and reminder, you're predicting this, we're not analysing crashes and doing this, we're predicting this in the future. We're saying that's a risk, that's an issue that could arise. That pedestrian that's struck at an intersection, that's factored and accounted for in this column, not the intersection. It happened at an intersection, yes, but We're thinking about crash types, not locations of crashes as such. Again, if a vehicle ran off the road at an intersection and hit a pole, that's a runoff road. Yes, again, it happened at an intersection. Hope that makes sense, but I'm happy to clarify that if anybody has any questions. So then we've got this row of exposure. And so what we're going, oh, actually, sorry, I better tell you what other is, because that's going to be an obvious question if I don't answer it now. So other is the assessment team's opportunity to put things in that haven't been picked up in these other crash types. So a few examples would be that would come up: crashes at railway level crossings, side swipe crashes may be something of interest, rear end crashes if they're not generated from an intersection. So if they're the back of a queue issue from an intersection and we're worried about people running to the back of that, you factor that and account for that in the intersection column. But if it's a mid-block rear end or emerging from driveways is another one, you'd take that in there. So Chantel's popped in there overtaking crashes. So again, it'd be sort of the mechanics of the crash there would determine where it would be accounted for in this matrix. So if they were overtaking and they ran off the road, it would be run off road crash. If they were overtaking and they crashed into a vehicle coming the other direction, that would be a head-on crash and accounted for there. So that's predominantly where it was going to be. If they were overtaking and they were trying to enter back in and this is, again, you're predicting this. This is not you're analysing a crash, what happened, but you're predicting, okay, that's a really bad merge back in point. Really, the taper is hidden by the horizontal, by the horizontal curve there. So they're going to come in. I've only got this light bit, so I'm worried about side swipe crashes. Then that could be fitting into the other category. Probably in that scenario, you'd be thinking about that, but you'd also be thinking about them leaving the road at that location because of that challenge, and that would be back also accounted for in runoff road. So you're thinking about the crash types, and for those who have done crash investigations, black spot investigations, crash reduction studies, these sorts of things, we often talk about crash codes. So they would either be DCA codes or RUM codes, or RUM codes in New South Wales and Western Australia, I think, and everybody else uses DCA, definition of classifying accident codes. So you can kind of think about these crash types as those crash codes rather than the location of the crash. Does that make sense? Certainly, when you do crash analysis, if there's been a crash at an intersection where a pedestrian's been struck, it's a pedestrian crash. You coded it as in the pedestrian crash types. So when you're now predicting crashes, predicting the future, you're again categorizing your predictions into these generic categories. Where do we find info on crash codes? Might be helpful in predicting crashes. Okay, that's an interesting one. Kez, we did a safe system snippet a while back on crash codes, which we then just put links to all of the, or pointed out, or had pictures of all of the crash code diagrams. Just wondering if you could just search on our website for just maybe DCA will probably pop it up. And if you can put a link to that in that snippet on our website into the chat, that'd be good. So thanks, Kes. DCA stands for Definition for Classifying Accidents, but and the other one, RUM codes, are Road User Movement Codes. The police use these as well when there's been crashes. I'll put that code to it. I don't know if it will be hugely helpful to you, but maybe it will help you. We'll find that. We'll pop that into the chat so you can have a look. Yeah, so Alwoods uses those, but yeah, I mean, Kes will find them. It's easy. It's all housed in the one little link. Okay. So what we're trying to do here in this matrix, is to put a score into each of the cells of this matrix. So each little box of this table, we want to put a score. And we want that score to be between 0 and 4. Now, for exposure, we've got here, okay, you're going to use AADT. AADT stands for Annual Average Daily Traffic. So it's the amount of vehicles. And we often get data when we do a safe system assessment on the vehicle volumes of the road or the intersection we're looking at. So if you had a vehicle volume of, say, 4,000 vehicles a day, well, you couldn't put 4,000 in there, could you? Because that's obviously not between 0 and 4. So there must be some sort of scoring reference sheet. And thanks, Kes. Kes has just put in a link to that snippet about crash codes for anybody who's interested. So 4,000 vehicles a day, how do we get that to a score between 0 and 4? Well, Austroads produced a scoring reference sheet, and I've snipped it here over 2 slides. So it's got the score, and then it's got exposure, likelihood, severity, and it's got a description. So let's have a look at what a 4 would be. A score of 4 for road user exposure. Volumes of vehicles that might be involved in a particular crash type are very high. And I'm going to cross this bit out because that's one bit that Austroads put in that none of the jurisdictions use now because it distorts things too much. So volumes of vehicles that might be involved in a particular crash type are very high, therefore exposure is very high. For runoff road, head-on, or other crash types, AADT is greater than 10,000 vehicles a day. For cyclists, pedestrians, motorcycle crash, volumes are greater than 100 units per day. 100 pedestrians crossing, 100 bikes going through the area, 100 motorcyclists. So that would be a 4. A 3 is between 5,000 and 10,000, or for vehicles, 50 to 100 for cyclists, pedestrians, or motorcycles. So I think you're starting to get the idea. 2 between 1,000 and 5,000, or 10 to 50. 1 less than 1,000 or less than 10 pedestrian, cyclist, motorcyclists, and a 0. Well, there are no pedestrians, there are no cyclists, there are no motorcyclists, or there's no intersection, there's no side road, there's no volume there, so that your intersection exposure would be 0. So we said, what did I say? 4,000 vehicles a day. So let's go here. We go 4,000. Well, 4,000 is between 1,000 and 5,000. So we take the 2 and we go, okay. Score there is a 2. Easy as that. Then we go to head on. We say, well, what's our exposure to head on crashes? Well, it's going to be the same number of vehicles on that road. So everything's the same. The only way that you would change that from the same as the runoff road is if there was a physical barrier system down the middle of the road that would actually like eliminate that exposure. And even then, sometimes I opt to use that in like a likelihood reducer or severity reducer, depending on a number of factors. Now, this is getting a bit into the finer detail of safe system assessing, but you just need to account occasionally for breaches of the barrier system or the like a central barrier system separating flows of high-speed traffic is incredibly effective. And it essentially eliminates the exposure to head-on crashes. So that's where it is. But occasionally, if we have a high number of large vehicles and the barrier system that's being chosen is very much a weak barrier system that's not going to contain some of these large vehicles and those interactions, it may be that you say, well, actually, I'll leave the exposure to head-on crashes as it is, and I'll account for all these benefits in another category. So, but if you don't have that absolute physical separation, then we're going to go with the same crash exposure. Okay. So cyclists, pedestrians, and motorcyclists will be counted separately. Yeah, so they're their own thing to look at, each one of them, and I'll get to how we get to the numbers of those shortly. If there is a high median, is score reduced for head-on? Not sure what you mean by a high median. Like, if you have you have a median between two traffic lanes and it's separated by curbing, for example, and then maybe a bit of grass. That to me doesn't change the exposure to head-on crashes. Okay, that lessens the likelihood a bit, but it doesn't change the exposure because vehicles will mount that and they'll go across the median completely and find the other lane. They'll do it a bit less frequently, but it'll still happen. What is the consideration of high percentage of heavy vehicles in a safe system assessment? Yeah, there is no specific definition. General rule of thumb, and Ostro's in the Guide to Road Design Part 6 talks somewhere loosely in there around 20% and above is considered high. But most of the time, if there's a barrier system down the middle of the road, we've virtually eliminated exposure to head-on crashes. And I'd be willing to put a 0 in there if that was the case. So then we talk about intersections. Now, intersections are one where you add up your volume. So your intersection is going to have, I'll use a little bit of this. You've got a road, and then you've got this intersecting road. We had 4,000 vehicles on this road, and then there was like 2,000, say there's 2,000 or something on this road. And obviously there's like nuances with turns and turn counts and the like. But essentially, that becomes 6,000 in your intersection, which you then go to your scoring reference sheet and you see that, okay, it's actually down here now and it's in a 3. It's between 5,000 and 10,000. So we'll go to a 3. You're interested in side swipes or something like that, that's definitely going to be 2 as well, because it's the same traffic volume, because we're thinking about passenger vehicles and trucks and stuff there. When you get to pedestrians, you've got to make this call of, okay, we've got pedestrians. How many pedestrians are there exposed to crashes? What are the pedestrian numbers? And this is where we are sometimes having to make a judgment call. We often get very good traffic data and we don't get great pedestrian data. And some might say that's an issue. I think that is an issue. And some say, you count what you care about. And so what's going on there, which is a fair enough call. So sometimes we get pedestrian counts and we're getting better at that as an industry. A lot of the time you're going to have to make a judgment call on it, what you think. And it'll be the same with cyclists and motorcyclists. Sometimes they're included in different actual counts and sometimes not. You might need to make that judgment call. And it's about the pedestrians that are crossing the road or that are in this general vicinity going through. And you go back to your scoring reference sheet and you use this. Is this a very sort of remote area? And we really don't think there's going to be many pedestrians at all, maybe a few, a few occasionally, or we might give it a 1. Same area is probably going to have low bike numbers as well. Maybe motorcyclists too. Motorcyclists, you can, most throughout Australia and New Zealand, certainly you can use about a 1 to 2% of ADT is usually motorcycles, unless it's a very popular motorcycle route. Different countries sort of have different rates of what you'd expect. So there you go. You've got to a point where you've put some scores in one of these rows. And you're at the point now where you go, okay, I'm happy with that. I've got to get on to this next one, which is likelihood. Okay, so Chantel's talking about some roads with up to 40%. Yeah, I would definitely say that's high percentage of heavy vehicles. Low volume, but high percentage. So now we need to make an assessment of the likelihood of crash. So we're now thinking about, say, the likelihood of a vehicle running off the road. And this is where we start to get somewhat subjective. So what you're going to do is take into account a whole lot of factors. So we've got speed, geometry, shoulders, barriers, hazard offset, the guidance, lighting, surface conditions. I mean, it could be heaps of things in there that are going to influence the chance that somebody leaves the road. And what we do is we start to actually dot point these out. We go and we look at the site, we dot point a whole lot of things out. Then we go to our scoring reference sheet. We say, okay, what can we see here on likelihood? We've got a 2. What are we going to get? It is unlikely that a given crash type will occur. Okay, that's not much help. Go with a 3. Is likely that a given crash type will occur. These are not helping us a huge amount. Let's go with a 4. The likelihood of individual road user errors leading to a crash is high given the infrastructure in place. E.g., high approach speeds to a sharp curve, priority movement control, filtering right turn across several opposing lanes and high speeds. Okay, so we're starting to see some scenarios you would say are a 4. Now the thing, let me give you a 1. A 1 is highly unlikely, and a 0, there's only minimal chance that a given crash type will occur for an individual road user given the infrastructure in place. An extreme driver behavior or substantial vehicle failure could lead to a crash. Now you pretty much never use a 0 for likelihood because humans being humans are making mistakes all the time, and we're seeing these crashes happen. If the infrastructure is set up very well, then we can get into a 1 a lot of the time. But yeah, it's very, very rare. Almost never would you use a 0. But when you think about this and you say, well, hang on, what is the chance of crash at this location? If you take that at face value, it's kind of always going to be highly unlikely because of the nature of crashes. They're infrequent at specific locations. And so what we've done is we've created a scoring fact sheet, not like a sheet to help you on this, to talk about this, because it's a relative assessment. You sort of talk about it relative to other areas. Is this high or is this low based on the infrastructure that's there? High, highly likely, unlikely, likely, etc. So you need to make a judgment call on this, and you make your judgment call after you dot point out a whole lot of things. You might say it's a high-speed road. It's it's a straight road though. It's got sealed shoulders. It's got good edge line. It's got audio tactile edge line. The hazards are offset 9 meters from the edge line. It's got good lighting. The surface condition's good. So all of that packed in, I'm going to say that the likelihood is highly unlikely, or is it unlikely? I'm going to go with unlikely that they leave the room. Then you do the same for head-on. A lot of these factors will, reappear there. The surface, the geometry of the road, speed, these sorts of things. But there may be others. Okay, what's the separation between them? Is there a single white line? Is it a wide center line, white line, or is it a physical median but without that barrier system? And you dot point all of this out, and then maybe you come to a score for that. And you continue to do this for all of them. So the intersection, what type of control is there? Is it stop control? Give way? Is it got signals? Has it got a roundabout? Has it got other features there? Is it clear that there's an intersection? Does it have a see-through effect? Does it have dynamic visual obstruction issues? You pack all of this in and you look at it, you decide where it sits, and you might decide that it's good, and maybe, yep. So you go through all of these and you get your scores, but you don't just put a score in. You got to dot point lots of reasons why you landed on this score. And so there you get your likelihood line, your likelihood. Now, let's see if we've got any questions. We will have our break shortly because we're ticking along nicely. And I want to get you to the point where I can explain your assignment and your quiz, and I maybe even give you a little bit of time to start getting into it. Is it recommended to be more conservative if you are unsure which score to use? Yeah, I think that's a fair call. I think the more of these you do and look at, and if you assess with people, you can start to get a bit of calibration. We're currently working on a bit of a scoring calibration tool, if you'd call it that, just a simple thing to plug in some variables and it spits out what a score generally should be. Of course, this is going to be highly determined by the site context, so we can't do that, but at least it'll give a general gauge for it. Yeah, so a good comment in there around it is subjective, but the increments and the score 0 to 4, it's a decent thing. And I want you to think about the scores not as scores as much, but just as banding of risk. So the same way we would do an absolute traditional risk assessment, where we would say, what's the chance of crash? Very low, low, medium, high. Very high. Well, this is the same, but it's just got numbers to it. And I'll show you why numbers are a good thing to use in this situation. But just think about it a little bit like that. So then you get to the severity. You say, okay, what is the severity of crash when it happens? We've talked about the number of people exposed to it. We've thought about that and accounted for that. We've thought about the chance that this crash is going to happen. Now, how bad is it going to be when it does happen? And this is going to be dominated by speed or the features that are struck. So if we talk about roadside, we're going to have speed as a big influence. How fast they hit the hazard or after they've left the road. And then what is that hazard? Is it a tree or a culvert, or is it a barrier? I mean, a barrier is technically a hazard, but it's a very friendly hazard. So that's, if they hit a barrier and they run along that, it's going to be a very low score. But if it's a tree, it's going to be a very high score. And so you do all of this thinking. Let's look at the scoring reference sheet on this. There's some information in here. There's a lot written here. Should a crash occur, there is only minimal chance it will result in a fatality or serious injury to relevant road users involved. This might mean kinetic energies transferred during the crash event are low enough to cause a fatal or serious injury. Not to cause a fatal or serious injury. Or that excessive energies are redirected or dissipated before being transferred to the road user. User may refer to the safe system critical impact speeds for different crash types while considering the impact angle, roadside hazard, barriers, and impediments. So it's directing you back to biomechanics of injury thresholds that we've been talking a lot about. And this is where this thing comes into play, okay? So this helps you with a little bit of guidance, a little bit of judgment. Okay, where are we at? Like, we've got a lot of crash types here. We don't have all crash types, and we've got speeds, and you can have a look. So if we're thinking about runoff road, well, we've got trees and poles here, and we've got speeds along here. So up around the 60, 70s kilometers per hour, we're in up around the 3s and 4s, and you'll make a bit of a judgment call. Judgment required in the areas that merge there in terms of the colors, but even in what crashes are happening. If we're up at head-ons, we see there, we might be a bit higher, 70s, 80 kilometers. We're into the 3s and 4s. Above that, we're definitely up in the 4s. So you use that, and you're able to go back and you're able to put your scores there depending on the context you're in. Speed zone, the speed you're expecting vehicles to be traveling. You just assume the crash is happening. And whatever, you decide based on the speeds, you're still going to point lots of things out. And you get to your scores here, whatever they might be. I'm just popping some scores in now for the purposes of us filling this out. I'm going to show you an example of ones shortly. Percentage heavy vehicles in there, obviously colliding with heavy vehicles are going to have more energy, they've got more mass, they're going to do more damage, the outcomes will be more severe. So you're factoring that in. Speeds is a huge one. And yeah, you may factor in there things like the percentage, like if you know the area is heavily populated by elderly people, the severity of pedestrian crashes is likely to go up a little bit. But once you get to this, you've sort of populated numbers. And the reason we use numbers is because then you multiply. You multiply down. So then you've got, so 4 to 12. And you've got, so we've got 4, 8 on there. And we got 9. And so you can start to see you're getting scores for each of these crash types. And they're out of 64 for each crash type. And then if you want to, you can add all of these up to get a final score out of 448. Okay. I don't get too overly concerned or interested in the final score. It's more for me about looking at these numbers and where risk is presenting itself. So why do we use numbers? Well, the reason you use numbers is if you can get a 0 in any cell, you eliminate that crash type. So let's take, for example, intersection. If you have no intersection, so you've got a mid-block location, or you've blocked off the one intersection, so it's no longer there, you're able to put a 0 for intersection crashes. And then you multiply anything by 0, and the answer is 0. You've eliminated intersection. Likewise, if you are able to absolutely hand on heart say nobody will crash at this location, even though humans are humans and they make mistakes all the time, which is going to be very, you're really not going to do that. But in theory, you could say, well, it doesn't matter how many vehicles are exposed to it and what the severity is, because nobody's crashing. But also, if you're able to get your energies within tolerable thresholds and put a 0 down here, you don't actually care how many people are exposed to it and what the likelihood is, because every time all these crashes happen, everybody's going to walk away or just have very minor injuries. Now, we don't want that to happen, so I always put a disclaimer. If you got like 4, 4, 0, you're kind of going, there's going to be lots of little minor incidents and things. We should probably have a look at that. But yeah, from a pure safe system perspective, we're more far more okay with that than having community killed and seriously injured. So you can see there that this is able to start to generate some scoring, some thinking, some pointing at risk. A one-way road would have a 0 for head-on. Yep, generally yes. I mean, that's yeah. In one way, you could think about that as just one carriageway of a completely divided road with barriers and the like, which sort of is a one-way road to a degree, or a one-way road. You might have a ponder and think about how much, whether there's good potential for wrong way travel on that one-way facility or the like, or things like that. But generally, yes, that would be a 0. Yeah, so the use of a median barrier would put a 0 for head-on in terms of exposure, and then so if you've got your median barrier, you've eliminated exposure to head-on crashes, and that risk has been virtually eliminated. if you were on Chantel's road with 40% heavy vehicles, you would want to also look in what is that barrier system and what containment level has it got? Are we still confident that we've eliminated the exposure to head-on crashes, or are we thinking, okay, we've significantly reduced the likelihood of it, but we're still worried about some vehicles breaching that barrier system, and so the head-on risk exists, it's just been lessened. But most of the time, yes, the median barrier is just eliminates exposure to head-on crashes. So the head-on crash risk is gone. Yes, correct, Chantel. So good. Okay. So I think we've come through that quite nicely. Let's take our break a touch early, and I'll give you a little bit, I'll give you a good 5 minutes here, because I want you to have a think about this, get your head around it a bit, pop any questions you've got into the chat, and we'll come back into it. But go fill your coffee up, and do, if you have any questions, pop them into the chat, please. Okay, some good questions coming in to try to get some clarity around those situations where there are, an anomaly in the amount of vehicle, like percentage of heavy vehicles or the like being used. And so I'll make a few comments on it. I'm reluctant to ever add columns to the matrix. Technically, you can, like, well, Austroad's original document said, you could add stuff like, and I know Queensland has a bit of a practice of adding a heavy vehicle column. So that is an option. I like Albert's point around the use of the other column though. That's probably where I would, if I wanted to really focus on a particular road user type that wasn't adequately being represented or was clouding that. So clouding another road user. So by that, I mean, like, if you took head-on crashes and you dominated it with the heavy vehicle, you may not be accurately representing the rest of the road users if you've got these high percentages. So then you could extract that to other crashes, and you'd represent it there. So, but you do sort of have that as an option within the percentage of heavy vehicles, and you just be really ramping up the severity of outcome for anything. So there are sort of options there. For me, I would either, yes, have used the other, or I would just ramp up severity of outcome of crashes. So the other thing I was thinking about was, like, other sometimes gets used for like e-scooters. So it's a road user that you go, well, you could put that into pedestrians, but it's really not a pedestrian, is it? I mean, some obscure road rule might classify it as a pedestrian, but that's where it would shift to that. So there's some similarity in that with heavy vehicles, in that thinking of, okay, it's not really operating the same as the other vehicles we've got in this category. So I'll separate it out to the other. I do have, and I could send an example where heavy vehicles have been extracted out as their own column. As I say, it's not my preferred way to do it. Using the other would be preferred in that situation. Okay. So here's our matrix. It's all filled out. Let's keep moving along. And let's have a look at an example. I admit it's a trimmed down example just for the training exercise and training purposes, but I'll show you through it, and then I'll hopefully set things up so you've got your you've got some time to start in on your assignment. So here's an intersection. It's passively controlled, give way sign. You can see there's a vehicle waiting there. It's got a bit of a footpath. They're planning to either build a roundabout at that location or to build a signalised intersection using the existing road alignment, or to build a conventional T intersection with the signalisations and some lanes and the like. So what we do is, first thing is to take the existing conditions, the existing road environment, and say, how many vehicles are exposed to crashes? Now, we don't need a huge amount of information written into this cell, because you just use the scoring reference sheets and you just put in your numbers. The likelihood, though, you see factors that increase the likelihood, and they're dot pointed out, and factors that decrease the likelihood, and they're dot pointed out. And head-on crashes, factors that increase the likelihood, factors that decrease the likelihood, and they're dot pointed out, and then a score is put in there. Now you can see there's a 0.5 there. It's a bit hard to read on your screen, don't worry about it. It's more just to show that the intel you'd put into there. There's a 0.5 on the screen. We shy away from 0.5s. We try not to use 0.5s. If you absolutely feel you must, you can, but you can't go any more precise than a half. In my practice, the half gets used when the Safe System Assessment team can't decide between a 2 and a 3, and they end up going with a 2.5. You can see there then, severity, same thing. Dot point, lots of dot points, factors that increase severity, and then factors that decrease severity. And the score and your final scores. So this is the existing conditions, what's currently there. So you can do that on any bit of road and you get a feel for where you feel the risks present the most. Then what you do is you copy this, the whole table, and you paste it. And you look at their design. You saw there was a design of a roundabout. Go back to it actually, just so you can see. So there you go. Now you look at the roundabout and you imagine that built. Okay, they've built this roundabout just like it is on this design. You go to that existing conditions matrix that you have created, you've copied and you've pasted, and you start to manipulate it by saying, okay, I'm going to cross this out because those have been removed. Those have been removed. But I've got to add these things in here because they decrease the likelihood, and we haven't accounted for those. And we're going to move this score down. Cross these ones out, add this one, change that one. Not too many changes on the severity, okay. Bit of a change here, bit of a cross out. So you can see you're using your existing conditions as the base and then you're changing. And you do that for each of the designs they give you. So you go back and you get the existing conditions matrix here, copy it again, paste it for your signalized modified T, and go through and make changes and alterations. Then you go back and you get the existing conditions matrix again. You paste it. You make changes to it based on the conventional T. You keep doing that for as many design options as are provided to you. And that gives you then the ability to get total scores. And you could say, okay, for the existing site, we've got 118.5 as the safe system alignment score. The roundabout brought that down to 90, the modified T to 99, the conventional T to 105. So everything's making it a bit safer, a bit more aligned with safe system principles. The roundabout happened to do the best job of that. There would be further things that could be done. Where's at 90? Could we get it further and lower than that? We'll talk about those shortly. But that helps you, or it helps the project team, at least at one point, to be able to make some decisions or add this into their consideration. But I do like this better as the output to look at, because you're immediately able to see, okay, the roundabout's doing a good job everywhere, although we're a bit worried the cyclist one, okay, the roundabout was the lowest score, but it's a lot of that score is dominated by cyclists that are about it. So maybe there's more we could do to reduce the risk for cyclists, or you gather, this sort of intel. Or maybe there's a decision made, no, we actually have to go with this option. So where are we getting risk, and how can we look at, well, how do we reduce these scores as much as we can? And that's what you do then as an assessor, is to say for each of these options, the roundabout, the modified T signalized, the conventional T signalized, and all the other options, what could this project team do to make that even better aligned with safe system principles? And their recommendations, their ideas for the project team to consider. And we categorize those into either primary, that virtually eliminate the potential for death or serious injury, or supporting. Supporting are good road safety treatments, but they're not expected to virtually eliminate the potential for fatal or serious injury crashes within that column. So Austroads has provided within the Safe System Assessment Framework a whole list of primary treatments for different crash types and a whole list of supporting treatments for different crash types, which may spark ideas for you. A lot of the time, things like, we were just talking about median barriers. Median barriers are a primary treatment. Roundabouts are primary treatment for that intersection crash with vehicles, passenger vehicles. It may need some more tweaks for other road users. So a lot of the stuff that's been a bit more traditional, like signs, lines, surface conditions, they're supporting treatments. They're good. We want to get all of that right. But we know that even if you get a road, high-speed road, with really great surface, good line marking, bit of sealed shoulders, good signage and everything like that, people can still leave that road, and they will leave that road, or they'll leave their lane and they'll enter the other lane. So we know that it's not eliminating that crash potential. I put non-safe system in here only really more for terminology purposes. Road planning, design and management, they're not expected to improve safety, so going the wrong way. We wouldn't want that to be recommended, but occasionally one really hampers the ability to get that primary treatment in the future. So that's sort of generally categorized as a non-safe system treatment. So I stress it again that we're providing recommendations to their designs to improve the design. Now, if you just had an existing bit of road and you wanted to do sort of a safe system assessment on it, which is okay, you would do the assessment on that existing bit of road, and then you would just come up with recommendations to improve it and categorize those as either primary or supporting. You wouldn't get score as such. You might actually be able to then say, okay, well, let's create some sort of plan or design using those and then score that. And that could work. But yeah, predominantly we get given a design, say, you do a safe system assessment on this design. So you look at the existing conditions, you score that. You look at your design, you score that. And then you make recommendations on that design and say, hey, you could also include this or change this, and that would improve things. Now, there are wider things that we add into a safe system assessment. These are questions that are asked, and you don't actually put scores to these. These are qualitative questions, and you just write dot point answers or things that you've identified. So are road users likely to be alert and compliant, and are there factors that might influence this? What are the expected compliance and enforcement levels, drugs, alcohol, speed, road rules, driving hours, etc.? What is the likelihood of driver fatigue? Can enforcement activities be conducted safely? So that's been an interesting one on a few safe system assessments I've been involved in, and talking to the police about how they would undertake enforcement with the new barrier systems that are in, and what sort of tweaks and alterations could be done to really cater for that, or even sometimes enhance their ability to do enforcement. Are there special road users, so elderly children on road activities, distraction by environmental factors, big pineapples, or these sorts of things that might be distracting? And remember, you're just putting dot point notes to this, but you may then factor some of these into the matrix and for score alterations. There may not be enough to, though. What is your level of alignment with the ideals of safer vehicles? Oh, actually, sorry, back to this one. What's the likelihood of driver fatigue? I mean, that would play into your likelihood factor of run-off road and head-on crashes if it's sort of on a route with a long, between cities, or just a long-haul route. You'd be bumping up your scores for likelihood a little bit. Other factors might attract a large number of unsafe vehicles. Is the percentage of heavy vehicles too high for the proposed design? Are there resources to detect non-roadworthy, overloaded or unregistered vehicles? Can enforcement of those activities be conducted safely? Vehicle breakdown be capable? Are there issues that might influence safe and efficient post-crash care in the event of a severe injury? So congestion, access, stopping. That's often a motorway, freeway one. Do emergency medical services operate as efficiently and rapidly as possible? That's a rural one usually, and thinking, or maybe mountainous areas, hard to get to. Are there ways to get helicopters in and those sort of things? So you can see it's pretty broad thinking in the scheme of sort of safety. Are road users and medical response teams protected during the crash event? Are drivers provided correct information to address travel speeds on the approach and adjacent? Is there reliable information via radio, VMS, etc.? Is there provision for e-safety, safety system based on modern information communication technologies, cooperative ITS and the like? That's a real sort of question of the future in there, and it's often for an infrastructure project somewhat irrelevant. You don't need to answer anything to it. You can just say, nothing particular or not applicable, or no comments to add. But maybe if you're doing a freeway system or tunnel system or something, you might be considering some of those aspects. What is the level of alignment with safer vehicles is another one, which is a bit out of the infrastructure sort of thinking, but the reason that was put in is the safe system assessment is a very versatile tool. You could do it on a remote community, or you could do it on a mine site or a private operation, and it would be analysing a bit of what's the fleet, what are the safety features of the fleet, how is that all, does that all play out? So again, general commentary, general thinking, trying to get people to think wider about safety. And we've got the matrix, which is very dominated on looking at the infrastructure. These are sort of interactions with the infrastructure and other elements of the safe system. So questions coming from Sarah. So how far do you go with making recommendations within a safe system assessment of a design? Would you only recommend low cost improvements that could make that as to be made to the design as part of the assessment? No, there is freedom as a safe system assessor, and in fact we highly encourage it to do to suggest fundamental changes if you believe that that will give better alignment with safe system principles. They're under no obligation to do what we suggest, and in fact you often give multiple suggestions, but we don't want, in fact the whole purpose of a safe system assessment is to actually activate some of that thinking rather than just put up a warning sign. Actually deal with the fundamentals of the issue that's there. So good question, thank you. So should the safe system assessment team be independent of the project, similar to the road safety audit? Okay. The general practice is that yes, they try to have an independent team, but Austroads and even the Victorian and South Australian guidance are a little bit more lenient on that compared to road safety auditing, which has to have that independence. And talk about the possibility for designers to be included in the assessment team and to have a bit more of that collaborative approach to it. Okay. So the report that's produced should have some information about the assessment, and I'm going to talk about the difference between a full and a rapid assessment next week. List of members of the assessment team, meetings and the inspections, a bit of the description of the process, background information, context, the matrix for all of the design options, those qualitative questions around commentary on other elements of the safe system, and then ways to make that design better aligned with safe system principles. But I don't need to really list those because there are now templates available to use, and we'll give you one of the templates. And if everybody just uses that, we've got a consistent output. And so this is what we're going to be getting you to do. I'll take you through it. I'll jump you into the learning management system shortly, and I'll actually take you sort of through exactly what you're doing. But you're going to be given one of the templates. You'll get the Victorian government template for a safe system assessment. And we've highlighted some of it in yellow, which is the bits that we want you to complete, to fill out. So we are going to ask you to go to a site. So we're going to give a design to you, and it'll be close to the address you've given us. And we'll ask you to go out there because you're going to try and do an assessment of the existing conditions, and then you're going to imagine the design, imagine it built at that site. And we want you wearing a high-vis vest when you're out there. We don't need you to be out there measuring lane width or anything like that. So you can just stay back and observe the site. We don't want you to be a hazard to others in any way, making them walk around you onto the road or anything like that. We want you to park safely. We've looked at all these sites to ensure that they can be done safely by you. but make sure you park safely, don't block people's sight lines or those sorts of things. And we've got a safe work method statement, which I'm going to jump you into shortly and show you, which is just to try to ensure that you will do your part in being safe when you're out there as well. We've assessed them all as and done our risk assessments and made sure that they're low risk for you to go out there. But we just need to make sure you're going to be acting accordingly. So I'm going to stop the slides here, and I'm going to jump into learning management system, but happy to answer anybody's questions as they come up. Okay, there it is. Okay, so you're all very familiar with the learning management system. Well, one thing I will, while I'm here, point out is in the reference documents and resources here, you've got the TMR templates. Don't use those for the thing, but if you want to use those, that's all in there. This one, the Safe System Assessment Framework. If you open that up, and you jump down to around, page 18, I think it's even before that, 17, 18, you can see pedestrian treatments, and you can see their options treatments, and you can see their primary treatments. Then these ones are supporting treatments. These ones are supporting treatments. You can see that, other crashes, intersection crashes, head-on. So there's the one-way traffic or a median barrier, very, very wide. Median have to be very wide for that. So you can see there's some good info in there to help you. Let's jump back to here though. So down here, we're in module 4 though. And you got the slides from this module. You've got a quiz to do. You're getting good at those now. Here's the safe work method statement. So you can have a read of that or have a look at it. And then we just need you to confirm that you agree with that. You're going to abide by that. You're not going to go out on the site when you're intoxicated, and you're not going to, those sorts of, just going to be sensible out there. So have a look at that. Then this is the assignment. Okay, this is what you're going to do. So you click on that. You'll see that they've got a Word document, and we've got an Excel document, and then there's a whole lot of PDFs there. So you're going to find your name, hopefully, and that's going to be your site. So you might see a number of people. Hang on a second. This one doesn't have a name to it. That's a bit weird. Just looking for one. Here we go. We've got Bendigo. We've got a few people in Bendigo there. Let's have a look at what's going on with this one. So you download that, and it'll be a design of some upgrades to a site. There you go. So it's a site. It's got some proposed upgrades. You'll be going out there and you'll be looking at that site. You can see on there that it's got some traffic volumes for you. Whoa, what did I do there? Okay, I'm not sure what I did there. You got some traffic volumes, and you just use those. So let's go to the template to see what you'll actually be doing. Okay, so you get this template, this word template. Complete only the highlighted sections. Say it again, highlighted sections only. Try and make it really easy with crossed out a lot of stuff. So we don't need you to write an executive summary and everything like that. We just narrowed this down to try and make it as quick as possible for you to prove that you understand this. Don't worry about the table of contents. It's crossed out, as are the figures. If you're doing a full safe system assessment, obviously you'd flesh all of this out. Now you put your name in there. Now, as you saw there, there's some sites that have multiple people. If you wanted to work in a team, we are okay with that. If it happens to work out, you can make that happen. You're welcome to do that. If you do it, we want everybody's name listed in here, and we want each of you to upload the report into the learning management system. So you've got to all submit a report, one report each. It can be all the same, only though if it's got everybody's name listed here in every report. We don't want to see two identical reports that only have one assessor in each of them, if that makes sense. Then a bit of a description of the proposed work, the existing speed limit at that location, snip of the design, so it's there, so I'll package it up nicely. An assessment summary, well, you do this at the end because you can't summarize it until you've sort of been through it all. The scores of the existing conditions and the score of that one design that we've given you. And a graph. Well, you've got to fill out all your matrix first before you get to the graph, but I'll show you that in a second. So then you fill out your matrix and you start with the existing conditions. And for this one, you're going to write, a bit of information in there, and you're going to put a score for existing conditions. You're not going to put a score for the design. Try to spell that out here. So there we go. Because the existing conditions, you don't have a design to score yet. You can fill some dot points out here, maybe 4 or 5 things to fill out there. Maybe fill a few out here. And then you're going to put an existing condition score there based on what you're doing. So you fill all of this out. Once you're happy with it all, you're going to copy the whole thing and down. So here's an example of the existing conditions. You can see there's no scores in there. Example of existing conditions. And then example of design. So you can see it's got scores in the design bit as well. Delete that. And then you're going to put yours in. Paste it in there and go, yeah, great, okay. No, those ones have been removed. Strike those through. Although we've added this new one, so we've got to put that in there. And the new score goes down to 1. Just make that red so everybody knows that's new. And there you go. You do that throughout the whole thing. So that's that. And then for that design that you were provided, you're going to do some pondering and thinking, hey, how do we make this better? How do we make this better aligned with safe system principles? And you come up with some ideas and you write an idea in here. and median barrier. Primary treatment. Maybe you'd flesh that out a bit. Type of barrier where you might start it a bit and end it a bit. You don't need to do the design for them, but those are the sort of things. And audio tactile line marking. So that would be a supporting treatment. Good treatment, not going to virtually eliminate runoff road crashes, but it's something that you can do. And you list a few of them, as many as you want. Add some rows if you want. And you can add a few. You don't need to write a conclusion for us. And then the last thing we want you to do is a picture of you on the site with a high-vis vest on. Prove to us that you actually went there, you looked at it. So it's one of our things to complete a safe system assessment course. Back before we did anything online, we'd all go out to different sites and look at in small groups, and we'd come around. But this one, you're going to do it because it's close to your home and the like, but we need to tick off, yep, they went to a site, they looked at it, they're actually looking at real world stuff. And that's it. So then you will take that. Oh, sorry. You filled out your matrix, you got all these scores. Then you're going to come back up here and you're going to want to put those total scores in here, and you're going to want to put a graph in here to make your life a bit easier again. We've got I think I've got it open here. Yeah, a little graph generator, Excel. You could have you'll do this yourself in 5 minutes, but we're just trying to save you a bit of time. Put your scores in. And it produces scores for you for the existing conditions, and then for the design. And you can then just snip that and go back to your here and replace this one with that new one. Okay. So I've covered a bit there. Does anybody have any questions about the task that they have? Oh, sorry, some of these grab my attention. Do we have a hand up there? There's a turbo roundabout coming in there. Very interesting. Yeah, feel free to pop your hand up if you want to ask a question verbally. Yeah, pop your hand up and then we will give you the ability to unmute yourself. Hello.
Hi, Ken. How are you?
Good. How are you?
I'm good too, Ken. I just wanted to ask you that I'm working in Bendigo, but the thing is that I'm not staying over there, so I won't be able to go to that site, like the site that you mentioned just right now, during a couple of days. Probably I'll be going to the site next week.
That's okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, we can give you another site if it's more convenient.
Yeah.
So that's not a problem as well. You just need to get in contact with the team. But if we have a look here, and we go back to complete your assessment, down the bottom here, it says you've got 14 days and 5 hours to do this assignment.
Yeah, then I can do it. Yeah, then I can do it.
Okay, good. Well, thank you for asking the questions, because I think others might have had the same question, and reminded me to get the time frame to you. We've tried to streamline this down to something that's not overly consuming of your time. We hope it can be done in a couple of hours for you, where you have a look at the site, which is convenient at some point in the next week or so, and then a week or two, and then download, you've got a template there, you just write stuff into it and prepare it. So a bit of work to do. The other thing is that if you're having any difficulty with getting your head around this, we have resources available to help you, to mentor you to answer your questions. So you can organize a one-on-one Zoom chat, or you can shoot an email through and we'll get back to you. And it's a training course. So, you know, if you submit it, and you'll get lots of detailed feedback. And if you don't quite get up to that 80% on it, you'll be asked to resubmit it, and then you'll be able to adjust based on all of that feedback you've got. Okay, so yep, if you need an extension, get in contact with people. So if you've got an unknown road user volume, you do make an assumption, and you just list that. When you write in the exposure cell for that road user or crash type, you just say, yeah, no volume provided, assumed at this, safe system enhancement score of this. Now, motorcycles, as I mentioned earlier, was sort of between that 1% and 2% of AADT. But yeah, if you don't know, you've got to look at the site, make some assumptions yourself, and just list it. Good question. Yes, Chantel's brought up another good wider thinking thing. So certainly, as you know, if you're going to a site and you're wearing a high-vis vest, some of the community may come out and want to know what's happening and what's going on. What are you doing? You can simply just say you're on a training exercise, and please don't show them the design and say this is planning to be built there, because some of them may be particularly framed for this course, or some may be things that are very old and actually are not going to be built or completely changed, or these sorts of things. So don't, just say you're on a training, you're doing a training exercise. Any other questions about the task? All right, while you think of that, I'm just going to say that you've got a bit of extra time here. You've got a little bit of time. We try to always do this to get you to a point where you can catch up. So if you haven't done any quizzes, I want you to use the next bit of time to go back, finish those quizzes off, finish any assignment that's lingering still, and then start to download this and get your head around the task that you've got ahead of you. Okay, so use your extra little bit of time wisely here. Keep in contact if you've got questions. Otherwise, I think, Kez, we might let everybody get stuck into their assignments.
Yeah, it sounds like a good idea.
Good. Well, thanks, everybody. Into the meat of the course now, and look forward to hearing from you, and I'll see you next week.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.